In 1996, I came out here to Nevada to report on a top-secret base known as Area 51 that the US government didn't want you to know about. The reason, according to Bob Lazar, a man who claims to have actually worked at the base, is that it houses recovered alien spacecraft. He went public with these wild claims in 1989 on a local Las Vegas news station, and he immediately sparked a massive media circus, which has now brought tens of thousands of sky watchers to this remote location and turned Area 51 into the UFO capital of the world. But is Lazar actually telling the truth? Are there alien sources hidden beneath lake beds just a few kilometers up the dirt track behind me? Well, after nearly 3 years of research, which has taken us from the dust of Nevada through to the corridors of power in Washington, we believe the answer is no. And yet Dreamland is very much a reality. There is a test facility out at Groom Lake, and the security here is very real indeed, as the Jeep watching our every move at the moment testifies. And at night, there are UFOs in the sky, but they're unidentified flying objects which are man-made. They're 21st century flying craft, not alien sources.
There is no question that the facility is there, that the government has said very little in the past about it, that it has the right to test things like the U-2.
I believe UFO cover stories have been used to cover actual aircraft operations.
Everything that I've seen is pretty easily traced back to terrestrial technology.
I've been there probably 50 times. I've never seen a flying saucer out there. I've never seen anything even close to something that's unexplained.
For my money, I don't think it is possible that we are back engineering alien spacecraft.
Set on a remote dry lake bed 80 miles outside Las Vegas, Area 51 is just one part of the massive Nellis Air Force Base and Nevada test site, which together are roughly the same size as Switzerland. It was commissioned by President Truman in the 1950s as a top-secret location to develop and test America's new generation of post-war aircraft. In the technology fever of the 1950s, the base soon became home to the most exotic flying craft of its day. More recently, it was where the F-117 stealth aircraft was developed and test flown.
This is an area that has been known but officially denied for many decades. We go back quite a ways into the 40s and 50s with the development of the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71. All of our super-secret aircraft have been developed and test flown out in this particular area.
The A-12, from its inception through its retirement, was operated out of only 2 locations. Area 51 at Groom Lake was its original home. The first aircraft was delivered there in January of '62, and the last airplane left on June 21st, 1968.
Officially, the US Air Force denies that Area 51 exists, despite footage of the base and Russian satellite photos that we've obtained, which clearly show hangars and a huge runway stretching across the lake bed. The base has expanded since the 1950s, with several passenger jets now landing every day, carrying hundreds of workers to the base. With this level of personnel, the few buildings that can be observed above the ground are likely to be the cover for a large underground facility. We asked the Pentagon what they knew about Area 51, and they agreed to read us this prepared statement.
There are a variety of activities, some of which are classified through what is often called the Air Force's Nellis Range Complex. The range is used for the testing of technologies and systems and training for operations critical to the effectiveness of U.S. military forces and the security of the United States. There is an operating location near Groom Dry Lake. Some specific activities and operations conducted on the Nellis Range, both past and present, remain classified and cannot be discussed.
Security is strict and secrecy is paramount. Since the late 50s, the military has sequestered hundreds of thousands of acres that surround Groom Lake. The exclusion zone around Area 51 now stretches to 26 miles.
The secret status of the base is very, very well preserved. And even if people are talking about the operation of the U-2s back in the 1950s, 40 years ago, they're still not allowed to identify the base by name or by location. All they can say is it is a remote facility.
This place is an old anachronism from the Cold War. This is a place that harkens back to the old days, and because the military is continuing to treat it as a top secret facility that doesn't exist, it attracts attention. Naturally, everyone wants to know what goes on here.
There is no question that the facility is there, that the government has said very little in the past about it, that it has the right to test things like the U-2, like the SR-71, like the stealth aircraft. People forget the stealth aircraft, over $10 million spent on developing it, and more than a decade before its existence was even announced. That's what you do out at Groom Lake.
When you go to work out at those locations, you sign away your constitutional rights. You sign a piece of paper saying that if you violate your security agreement and you discuss programs that you're working on without a trial, without right of appeal, you're going to go to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary for 20 years. That's a real big incentive to keep your mouth shut.
Now, the real question, I suppose, is, are there any flying saucers out there?
2 years ago, we took to the skies above the Nevada desert to try and see Area 51 from the air. About 1 mile from the restricted area, we found out just how hard the authorities tried to protect this secret location. As we approach classified airspace, 2 fighters were dispatched to ward us off.
Now is just getting a little concerned that we're getting close now.
We've just been buzzed by 2 F-16 fighters. They passed our bow at about 800 to 1,000 miles an hour. These guys aren't messing around. They don't want us to be here. In fact, there's another one just gone by the bow there. They're either trying to get us out of the area quickly or force us to land. There goes another one.
Oh, that was really right up the ring. I'd say that was within a mile and a half. Well, you can see him, boy, that was amazing. And they have TCAS on board, so they definitely had radar contact with us. That was really close.
Today, security is as tight as ever. This is hardly surprising, as Area 51 is at the centre of a huge top-secret complex made up of the Nellis bombing range, where the latest generation of aircraft are put through their paces, and the Nevada test site. Here, America conducted above and below ground nuclear tests. We headed out deep into the desert, over 80 miles outside Las Vegas. This is some of America's most sensitive territory. Unlike the hordes of UFO watchers who were turned away or even arrested at the perimeter, the Department of Energy allowed us to film in the heart of this vast top-secret area, which is just a few miles from Area 51 itself. We passed the perimeter fence and the infamous camouflage guards in their white jeeps. And we drove through Mercury, the town which services the personnel out here in the desert. This is as close as cameras have ever come to Dreamland. I'm standing on Frenchman's Flat, deep in the heart of the Nevada test site. Papoose and Groom dry lake beds are just a few kilometers beyond the mountain range behind me. It was here on this lake bed that America tested its vast arsenal of nuclear devices. And today the lake bed is a monument to the Cold War, littered with bombed out shelters and structures. And yet the tight security here, up to 1,300 square miles, are off limits to the public, isn't because of aliens and crash saucers. It's because much of Ground Zero, as it's known, is still radioactive.
The people in charge of black programs believe in secrecy as a way of confounding and confusing, generating uncertainty among the enemies of the United States. I think it's been at the very least fortunate for the U.S. government and for the Pentagon that that Groom Lake has become associated in the public mind with the whole UFO story.
The man who shifted the focus from test craft to UFOs out at Area 51 was Bob Lazar. His claims to have worked on the back engineering of recovered alien spaceships captured the world's attention in 1989. His story was a heady mixture of science fiction, military cover-up and alien invasion. The media lapped it up without a single shred of credible evidence.
The base is against the side of a mountain, or small mountain, big hill. There are 9 hangar doors, and the hangar doors are not just shiny metal out in the desert. They are painted or sprayed with a sand texture to them, and from what I can ascertain, to prevent satellites from photographing the installation, so they look like the mountain range. It was pretty effective from what I could see. On the first occasion when I drove out there, all the hangar doors were closed, but at close range you could tell that they were doors and they would open. We drove around the left side of the installation, and there was the main entrance in there, and went through some gates and a security check and went inside, and it seemed like a typical government building. The work that I did basically entailed back engineering the power and propulsion system, and I opted to start with the power, the reactor that ran the craft. With the clearance that I had, that was known as Majestic clearance, there were only 22 people at S4 with that clearance to work on the craft.
Lazar claims to have worked at an area known as S4, housed on Papoose dry lake bed.
When I was brought in by bus, normally we had gone around to the left side of the installation and entered the door there. And for the first time, one of the hangar doors, the one on the end, was open. The bus drove up and we stopped there, and clear as day, in the hangar, taking up almost all the hangar, was the disc. Looked like something right out of a science fiction movie. And we stopped, got out, and for the first time I was let in through that door. And as I walked in there, I thought, well, this is the new advanced aircraft we've been working on, and this is why people keep seeing flying saucers, because it's ours and we've just been testing it probably for all these years. And when I walked alongside it, I ran my hand on it. I say it's metal because it was cold, so I just assume it was some sort of metal. And in fact, by the hatch that was taken off, there was an opening there, and it had a little backwards American flag stuck on it. So I was positive it was something we had manufactured.
Lazar also claims to have been inside the actual craft itself.
I was allowed on the craft on one occasion to see the placement of these systems in case it was important to their operation. So I was, of course, escorted in the craft, and it was obviously made to be piloted by something smaller than the average human being, very cramped in there. There was a sub-level where a little collapsing floor member opened, and I could stick my head and upper torso down underneath with a flashlight to see how the gravity amplifier is hung upside down. Looked around the placement of the 3 seats, about 1/3 to 1/4 the size of a normal human seat.
He says that after working at S4 for several months, and if true, in clear violation of his top-secret clearance, he decided to tell his close friend Gene Huff about his work at the base.
My reaction was to, without pressing him against his will, find out more, get him to tell me anything I could. And it wasn't disbelief. I think I was actually motivated to further read. I started investigating other books on UFOs and other researchers' information to see if anyone knew anything, and needless to say, they didn't know what Bob knew.
One month later, in March 1989, Bob Lazar said he went one step further. He said he decided to take his friends to the desert and show them an actual flying disc test.
I had remembered most of the days and times of testing. So I believe it was 8 or 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, somewhere in March '89, I believe. We went out with Gene Huff, my ex-wife, and John Lear. Shortly after the flight time that I had recorded, white light came up off the ground and hovered, and then began doing radical step maneuvers and darting from one side of the sky to the other, doing some impossible flight characteristics. But at times the craft had glowed tremendously bright, where we thought, being miles and miles away, we thought there was something wrong and the craft was going to explode, so much so that we all got behind the car.
It actually came closer. It came down the mountain range toward us to where we could actually see it was elliptically shaped. It looked like something that, it's strange to explain. It looks like an explosion that starts to explode and stops and doesn't explode and dissipate. That's how bright the light is. Your brain interprets it as an explosion about to happen.
Lazar says that on his 3rd visit with his friends to observe the discs at night, he was arrested. He claims he was taken to an unknown location for interrogation and says he never returned to Area 51.
They threatened my wife, they threatened to kill my wife, they said they'd stop at nothing. They said they thought they made that very clear. They couldn't believe that I had taken anyone out there to show them that, much less left with information like the flight test data, and wanted to know what else I had said, who else I had told specifically.
Security agents from the OFI, the Office of Federal Investigation, had been witnessed doing random security checks at his house. There was almost no question in anyone's mind, anyone in Bob's immediate life who talked with him on the telephone, that his phone was tapped. I mean, strange things would happen on Bob's phone and really continue to this day.
Dennis Mariani, who was my supervisor, called, and all he said was, "Do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now?" And that was the end of the phone call. They were crazy. They really were. They were completely out of control.
The notion that he would make a great patsy and he's the perfect scientist to work on such a project is interesting science fiction. In the first place, we have no reason to say he's a scientist. No diplomas, no papers, no memberships, nothing. In the second place, I worked on security for 14 years. People take security far more seriously than that. One of the strange statements he's made, there are only 22 people working on this thing. Well, you get more than that working on devising a new mousetrap for the government anyway. That makes no sense. And, it has all the trimmings, his story, of a Walter Mitty story. Somebody in his imagination was, stronger, brighter, faster than anybody else.
I did a variety of research relative to Bob Lazar. I actually met him. I obtained a copy of his, what they call a W-2 form, which is one of the IRS documents associated with pay. His particular form indicated that he worked for the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence. My investigation of this document and the claims that Bob Lazar made followed a very strict path of sound research. I contacted the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence and indeed verified that they were likely responsible for presenting that W-2. I investigated the issue with the Internal Revenue Service. They informed me the exact words were, it appears to be legit, that it was a genuine document. It was not something that had been fabricated. There were a variety of numbers, contract numbers and so forth issued on the document, which I was able to research, again finding that these were highly classified numbers. In fact, Internal Revenue Service ran into a brick wall when it came to trying to track down the actual employer associated with the document. His other activities in his personal life also would suggest he would be someone that would be very easy to ridicule. Certainly not your prime candidate for in getting involved into a high technology project like this if you're looking for credibility.
Exler did indeed try to investigate Lazar's credentials, but he couldn't find any evidence except the payslip. Las Vegas news anchor George Knapp was the first man to break Lazar's story. He's done more investigation into his credibility and claims than anyone else, and yet even he drew a blank at every turn.
He gave me information about his background, educational background and employment background. I started with his claim to have worked at Los Alamos Lab. I figured, well, that's a good starting point. If he worked at Los Alamos, it's pretty likely that he had an education somewhere. They don't just hire people off the street. And if he worked at Los Alamos, especially on classified projects, it's at least reasonable to assume he could have been hired somewhere else in Nevada to work on similar projects. We went to Los Alamos and got nothing even close to cooperation. They wouldn't respond to our phone calls. They say, we have no information on Bob Lazar. There's nothing in the files. I said, are you sure now? No, nothing in the files. I showed them the phone book entry that Bob had kept that said he was there. I showed him the newspaper article that showed that he was there. Are you certain that you don't have a Bob Lazar? Well, maybe we had a Bob Lazar. Here's an ID number, but he didn't work for us. He worked for someone else. And I found that to be the case at every step of the way in trying to verify his background. I mean, certainly there are a lot of questions about Bob's background that have not been satisfactorily answered, even to me, even though we've become close over the years. And I've worked with him more than any other, quote, UFO researcher.
Bob Lazar claims to have worked at the location he calls S4, based at Papoose Dry Lake. But is he telling the truth? His only proof is a payslip from the Office of Naval Intelligence. It has a derisory monthly salary on it, less than $1,000, not much for a so-called top-secret scientist. He can't back up any of his academic or scientific qualifications, and the government, research and scientific agencies that we spoke to have no record at all of a Bob Lazar. But the state of Nevada does. He's a convicted felon. So is Bob Lazar the victim of a massive cover-up to discredit him, as he claims? Or has he pieced together bits of fact with fiction to create a carefully worked illusion?
As far as I can tell, he's a bright guy who tells a great tale and who's told it often to people who have not checked on him, who accept the notion that, well, the government wiped his slate clean.
Lazar may or may not be a fraud, and yet thousands of people independently claim to see strange lights in the sky above Area 51, which they report as UFOs. They may be flying saucers, they may be military aircraft, but the sheer number of sightings has made Rachel, Nevada, the UFO capital of America. The local residents have seen their highway truck stop turned into the Little Alien. and tourists flock to Rachel to scan the skies in the hope of having a sighting. Local resident Chuck Clark has had many.
The most remarkable sighting that I've had in the last 3 years took place 2 years ago, February of '93. I watched a glowing object ascend vertically from the area south of Area 51, where S4 would be located, hang motionless in the air for about 10 minutes and then slowly start to descend. All of this while I thought I was watching a illumination flare that was launched from a mortar tube.
I can hear jets in the background. I'll zoom back a little bit. This is looking straight over Steve Meadowland's ranch, right here off 375 highway. This is right over the peaks.
Once it got down to the ridge line, however, it was in front of the hill that had come up from behind. The hill was about 12.5 miles from my position. It came down to a few feet above the ground at the base of the hill, hovered momentarily, which is still consistent with what a flare might do in calm air, but then suddenly it shot off westward, covered 4.8 miles in 1 to 1.5 seconds, and stopped cold, also about 30 feet off the ground, hovered just long enough for me to get it focused in my binoculars for maybe 2 seconds, and then it vanished right in place.
We've examined Chuck Clark's footage in detail, and it yielded no conclusions beyond what it is. Shaky camcorder footage of an image out of focus, shot at some distance. Just what the object really is remains a mystery.
What in the world is it?
There are certainly craft that are functioning with a physics which is not the physics that you and I know on a daily basis. That G maneuvers are impossible that some of these things do.
The most intriguing element had to be the fact that these objects had the ability to stop in midair, to lose and gain altitude in a vertical line, much like a helicopter might, only there was no noise associated with it, and they were extremely bright iridescent lights that had the ability to change color.
I've spoken to several people who've seen UFOs or disc-shaped craft out there. An attorney who lives here in town who has seen one. He saw one land outside the boundaries of Area 51. I've spoken to a very high-level managerial type who worked for a defense contractor out there for a number of years from a very respectable, reputable family. His credentials are beyond question, but he doesn't want his name or face used, and he has seen them many times.
There were a variety of craft that were all essentially generically sort of canister-shaped. I guess you would say they were predominantly disc-shaped or rounded. One of those Chinese lanterns or something or other. They appear to be colorful. At least they were multicolored in addition to the lights that seemed to be able to take on the light of the background. They could camouflage themselves somewhat in the sky by absorbing the blue light from the sky.
When you're seeing an aircraft, particularly at any great distance, what your eye is really picking up is simply the contrast between this dark dot and an illuminated sky behind it. If you reduce the contrast a little bit, say by illuminating the side of the aircraft that's towards the ground, the aircraft might very well seem to disappear. And there have been very many reports that visual stealth is being explored in a number of Air Force programs.
Well, if an aeroplane were flying over you and suddenly started to change color before your eyes, I know I would be extremely surprised by what I was seeing. I think it is possible that many of these things, which herald radical new technology, but which are developed here on Earth, could actually be mistaken for remarkable, rather exotic, even out-of-this-world craft.
As recently as 10 years ago, this Lockheed A-12, which flew out of Groom Lake, was still one of the US Air Force's most top-secret military aircraft. If you'd seen it in the skies at night, you may be forgiven for thinking you'd just seen a UFO. So how many of the hundreds of thousands of UFO sightings every year are nothing more than military aircraft? And is the great secret of Groom Lake just a 21st century descendant of this airplane?
The original test pilot was Lou Schock. The first time he saw it, I mean, he rubbed his eyes, he turned around, walked back out of the production hangar at Lockheed and walked back in because he did not believe his eyes. Initially, they were going to call it El Salvador instead of Cygnus. For the simple reason, in Spanish, that means the Savior or Jesus Christ. Like everybody who saw the airplane could not believe what they were seeing. It was a Buck Rogers airplane. This airplane was built, designed almost 40 years ago. 40 years before that, the hottest thing flying was a Seversky P-35. 40 years before that, it was a balloon. There's programs that they're working on today that are 50 years ahead of anything that you and I can even conceive of. So the technology has not stood still. So it's a very good possibility that we are looking at man-made transportation for the 21st century.
Of the 21st century was seen as far back as the 1950s, with the launch of a man-made flying saucer known as the Avro car. A CIA memorandum in 1955 stated that the Avro car was based on research developed by German scientists in World War II. We've obtained the only film ever taken of the first top-secret test flights in Canada. But why was the military testing saucer-shaped flying craft in the 1950s?
When one considers that Germany was plundered for its technical secrets at the end of the Second World War, what you actually can see is that many of this cutting-edge stuff, and some which was highly advanced and highly secret, would have ended up in the hands of the Americans, the Russians, the Brits, the Canadians and the French.
It's not only the US government that have literally been flying discs. The Russians have been working on a secret project codenamed the Taryelka since the Second World War. Located at the Saratov Air Base, 200 miles outside Moscow, the codename for the project is a Keep. And although it looks like a UFO, it's been designed for humans to fly. It's aimed at the commercial market, not the military, and the Russian engineers here at Saratov see this as an alternative to airplane transport in the 21st century.
The United States Air Force alone in 1997, according to the latest budget request, will spend more than $11 billion on research, development, and production of secret weapons systems of one kind or another. That's considerably more than the entire research and production expenditure of any other military in the world.
The US government do have flying saucer-shaped craft. In the mid-90s, the Lockheed Skunk Works announced the launch of Dark Star, an unmanned aerial vehicle.
I think it's time that you get a look at the newest star in the world of airborne reconnaissance. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Dark Star.
Dark Star is a very unusual looking aircraft. It has a saucer-shaped body and a pair of very long, slender wings attached to the back. like many stealth aircraft, including the B-2, its appearance varies drastically according to what angle you see it from. If, for example, you see the aircraft kind of edgeways on, you might well think that this was something totally foreign, totally unlike any conventional aircraft, and certainly much more like what people have described as flying saucers.
I think it's quite possible that some of the things that are being developed in the United States today are of such a revolutionary nature and still very secret that when they are seen from time to time, as things inevitably do get seen when they're tested, that they could be mistaken for what people think are UFOs.
Unusual but decidedly terrestrial aircraft can certainly present the appearance of a disk from many angles and can present some very, very peculiar appearances from different angles.
I think the number of sightings of UFOs in North America by civilians, I'd have to estimate between 85 and 95% are probably military aircraft. If you observe the F-117 from head on, it is a flying saucer.
A lot of flying saucer UFO sightings are explicable by both open commercial military aircraft and, of course, more secret classified platforms which are flying around the skies. It's very easy to mistake a light in the sky at night for anything you want it to be.
Certainly some of the lights which are considered to be UFOs by the true faithful are simply normal aircraft coming in and regular aircraft movements. There are also test sites around there which are used by some of the government laboratories that are engaged in laser work, which might create some unusual optical effects.
Big UFO convention came to an end in Las Vegas last night, and afterwards, naturally, some of the members went out in the desert to search for UFOs. A news crew went along too, and sure enough, it wasn't long before a mysterious, unidentified object appeared. Not too surprising, somewhere up there, you see it, because this patch of desert is right near a military test site. This looked like no aircraft lights that any of these folks had ever seen. Was it a bird? Was it a plane? Was it the Aurora, the secret plane? We don't know. More to come, I'm sure, and the Air Force is not saying anything as usual.
Scientists and aviation experts that we've spoken to think it's very likely that the secret of Dreamland is a 21st century flying craft powered by a new classified propulsion system, and that it's this technology that we see on occasion in the skies at night.
I think it is quite likely that the United States is working on technology which far outstrips anything that we see in the public domain at the moment. One has seen the United States Air Force and companies, defense contractors in the United States, involve themselves in, for want of a better expression, anti-gravity studies, finding free energy devices which will enable craft to take off and land without burning fossil fuels.
The only notion that seems viable to me for new propulsion systems is what is called the zero-point energy field, which is the basic field that supports all matter, is believed to support all matter. That is an unending source of energy, and there are a number of researchers that are playing with it, experimenting with it, and are quite confident they'll be able to extract energy from it in due course.
If they have broken through that barrier, they'll want to keep quiet about it. And if it's as radical as some people speculate, then they would want to keep quiet about it, not just for a number of years, but for decades, possibly up to 100 years.
Many believe that this new propulsion system has been developed in conjunction with former intelligence officers now running private companies. A man well acquainted with Area 51 is Admiral Bob Inman. His credentials are impeccable. He was director of both Naval Intelligence and the National Security Agency, as well as deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA. Inman retired from government service in 1982 to become president of Science Applications International Corporation of San Diego. According to our sources, one of the company's primary areas of research is into gravitational propulsion systems.
Jane's Defense Weekly, the popular military and defense publication, published an article about SAIC, and there's a postscript to the article that anyone who believes in the science of anti-gravity to be too arcane, too esoteric, even for the U.S. Air Force, should consider the electric propulsion study undertaken by SAIC for the Astronautics Laboratory, which is now part of the Phillips Lab. The study's primary objective was to outline physical methods to test theories of inductive coupling between electromagnetic and gravitational forces to determine the feasibility of such methods as they apply to space propulsion, and in simplified terms, an anti-gravity propulsion system. It remains for some the ultimate quantum leap.
I called Admiral Inman at his office in San Diego. I started by asking him what he knew or believed about the existence of UFOs.
Let me get right to the point that you're after.
Yep.
I had occasion in several different jobs to ask the question, was there any credible evidence? When I was the vice director at the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, I inquired at each of the three places at different times, do you have any credible evidence that would support the existence of UFO or, aliens?
Yeah.
And the answer was always no.
Janes wrote an article in which it mentioned Science Applications International, and it referred to some of the development it was working on as the ultimate quantum leap, exotic, shall we say, gravity propulsion systems. What exactly are those, and what are they used for flying craft?
I'm pausing because I want to make sure I don't overstate the case.
Right.
We're on a little sensitive ground here. I thought some of the early allegations of activity out in Nevada 15 years ago could well have been reflection of the prototype testing of some of the stealth vehicles. Some are clearly scientific phenomena. Some of it, again, will be something as simple as weather balloons that break loose, that get lost and go drifting. But there probably is some of it that is directly related to testing of late 20th century, early 21st century military technology related partly to reconnaissance in some cases and others to, attack aircraft.
To fully understand the story, you need to examine the facts. Dreamland, Paradise Ranch, The Box, Area 51, or S4, whatever you want to call it, there's been a secret test facility in this remote location in Nevada since the Second World War. Despite official denials on the part of the United States Air Force of its existence, we have the maps, plans, and satellite photos to prove otherwise. We've seen the transport planes take off from its runway, and we've seen these same DC-9s with the blacked-out windows arrive at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas, taking the base workers home. The security around the entire Nevada test site is very real indeed. Even casual hikers who stray into the perimeter are liable for arrest. And yes, there are armed guards, as well as helicopter patrols and sensors all over the desert to keep you out. And there are strange and unexplainable lights and flying craft in the sky. To many, this catalogue of facts adds fuel to their conspiracy theories. The truth is out there, but it will remain classified for many years to come.
It's likely to be a very long time before we discover what is actually being done out at Groom Lake now. If you look at the intelligence community particularly, they seem to wait anything from 15 to 20 years or more after something has been retired before they acknowledge its existence. Therefore, if things are operational now, we may not see them for another 30, 40 years. What also happens at that point is that things remain secret for so long that the people who originally decided they should be classified are retired or quite possibly dead. And it becomes almost impossible to declassify a program at that point because nobody knows quite why the secret is being protected.
The Air Force headquarters files up through 1955, 9,800 feet of material. That's 1,000 four-drawer filing cabinets. When I went to ask for stuff out of these files, only 10% of the boxes I was interested in had been classification reviewed. And in those boxes, there were withdrawal sheets all over the place. So secrets can be kept. They are being kept. One way that they're being kept is the naivete of the people who think, if this was going on, I would know about it. The ego is a powerful weapon.
Area 51, or Dreamland, has been and is the proving ground for America's next generation of flying craft. It's been the cradle for the development of the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 Stealth and B-2 stealth bombers, and is now undoubtedly home to its 21st century equivalent. And there's no doubt that the alien and UFO hysteria that's grown up around this location has provided a very handy smokescreen for what's really going on out at Groom Lake. And the lights in the sky? Well, our cameras have filmed literally dozens, and each time they've turned out to be military landing lights, commercial aeroplanes, unmanned aerial vehicles, or military flares. Unidentified, but definitely not alien. And so the real secret of Dreamland isn't UFOs after all. It's a military technology that's so secret that they've closed off part of Nevada the size of Switzerland for over half a century.
I think for anyone who's been out into the Western United States and seen the kind of place it is and let their imaginations run riot a bit, it is that kind of place. It is possible to imagine in these vast test areas technologies which are highly exotic, highly revolutionary, and would change the way we feel about science today.